You will definitely want to stay for our next scene setter, Agnes Stenbom. Agnes is a PhD candidate at the Royal Institute of Technology, researching AI in journalism. She also founded the Nordic AI Journalism Network in 2020 and just had a very successful meetup, 300 people in Copenhagen around AI in journalism. And she also led Schibsted's AI strategy and has worked with AI risk assessments for the past 5 years. And right now she leads that great ideas generator, Schibsted's IN Lab in Sweden. Welcome, Agnes. And we'll have about 15 minutes, hopefully time for 1 or 2 questions, so have them ready.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we can get some slides up. Charlie said slides were a bad thing, but I'm going to use them anyways. Very happy to be with you here. It's my first time in Vienna. It's a beautiful city, but I'm still very happy to be indoors with you all. As Jackie mentioned, I've been doing a lot of different things related to AI in the past few years, but today I'm going to talk about a specific initiative that we run in Schibsted, which is called InLab. InLab is a joint venture between Schibsted and one of our owners, the trust, Tinius Trust. We are on a mission to prototype future news experiences for current news outsiders. And we do that through speculative design, co-creation processes in socio-technical experiments. You might ask what that means, what it has to do with AI, and why it matters. And to start explaining that, I usually show this number. According to the Reuters News Institute in Oxford, 38% of global media consumers are selectively, actively avoiding the news. In my countries, I operate in Sweden and Norway, that number is 32 and 30. We typically have happier numbers in the Nordics, but when it comes to news avoidance, that really isn't the case. It's a global trend and it's escalating with speed. Consumers say that they avoid the news because the news makes them feel bad. It makes them feel stressed, frustrated, depressed. Younger users tend to report that they avoid the news because the format isn't relevant to them and the content isn't interesting. This is a very relevant trend for anyone interested in safeguarding independent journalism to consider. But I think we need to add additional vocabulary. Because at InLab, we use the term news outsiders rather than news avoiders. And we do that because we think it's critical that the news industry recognizes that low to no news consumption is really conditioned by what opportunities we in the industry give to different groups in society to consume our products and consume journalism. That might be about age, language, education levels, socioeconomic status. At Schibsted, the biggest media group in the Nordics, we know that we have not been giving the same attention and care to different user groups. And that also leads to specific user groups more than others churning out on journalism. We call it news outsidership because we think it truly is an outsidership. Not getting the news, not getting the facts about what's going on in the world around you is a true user problem. And it's one that can have harmful democratic consequences. So it's a problem that we really want to meet, and it's one that we are trying to understand more about and prototype solutions to. News outsidership is not one group, one thing, but just like artificial intelligence, it's an umbrella term, covers broad terrain, but gives you a rough idea about the problem or the issue at hand. And speaking of AI, I truly believe that our growing opportunities in the technological domain of AI will enable us to create new types of media experiences. With the help of various machine learning systems, we could be creating new types of journalism, new types of news experiences. But it can, it's not certainly that it will, because it requires of us in the industry, in the field, to carefully consider changing user needs, changing user preferences. Only by doing that, we can reap the full potential of AI and actually use it to meet new audiences groups. We could use it to upsell or further engage our existing audiences, but we could also use it to reach the people who are currently on the outside. That demands of us to be able to think differently about the future than of the past. And if there's one group of people or one domain that's good at that, challenging the ways that we do and think, it's science fiction. To me, they're best in class in imagining what the world could look like. And as one of the godfathers of that field, Isaac Asimov, noted once, science fiction is really the only branch of fiction that takes as its basic assumption that societies are going to change, or the future won't look like the past. It's very basic, but I think it's important for us in journalism to think about what that means for our field. I think there are concepts that we could borrow from science fiction when it comes to reimagining journalism in a digital-first information landscape. To do that, we can leave the aliens and the zombies to sci-fi writers, but pick up on some of the basic frameworks. And one of those basic frameworks is the futures cone, or the cone of future possibilities. This is a very basic future studies framework that tries to illustrate that from where we're standing today, there are many directions that developments could take, many possible futures out there. The S on the end is not accidental. There's not one linear path to the future. Not all futures ahead of us are desirable. They're not all futures that we want, but it's safe to say that there are many possible directions for developments to take. And I believe that journalism, not least given the creative side of our industry, has a responsibility to start imagining what those futures could be and how AI could play a part in those various futures. I think it's important that we explore not just the futures that we want, but the possible futures out there so that we could have an informed discussion about where to go and why. Looking at how well journalism has been stretching this cone out, how far into the possible futures we've gone, I think it's safe to say that we've been quite constrained. Looking at our visual framing of what AI could mean for journalism, I think it's quite interesting to note how we're tying our new technological opportunities to practices and devices of the past. I think this New York Times illustration should get some kind of prize. It's a robot going on some kind of premium mechanical typewriter, liking things on social media. But you get the idea. We at least illustrate humanoid robots writing, reading, or maybe making an image. And I think it's really important that we start asking ourselves, what if it's not just about producing text? What if it's not just about the ways that we produce photos? Essentially, this comes down to our ability to do innovation in different ways. To me, that's a framework that's useful to think about is the exploit-explore continuum. Namely, are we directing our innovation efforts to exploit opportunities already at our hands, to do more of what we already know, but maybe in more efficient ways? Safe business cases, safe returns, clear returns. Or could we be looking into more explorative innovation, radical innovation, risky innovation, unknown returns? As an industry, I think we really have to do both, and I think many of you are actively exploiting the opportunities of AI already now. Many of us are using AI to generate summaries or to produce photos for replacing stock photos. Exploitative innovation at its best, and AI can really help us do that. But it's important that we also explore possible other futures. At InLab, we want to explore possible futures, but we don't want to be tied to the past ways of doing things. And that means that we have to work with people who are not bound or invested in traditional ways of doing things. It's really hard to reimagine the field that you're in. It's really hard to actively work for a completely different future than one that maybe has you in the picture. So to do that, we want to explore radically different news formats, and we do that by doing work in radically different ways. I usually show this comic to try to explain what we do. To us, we need to step outside of the current newsroom, the current organization, and work together with people who have different information, needs, and desires, who look at the fourth estate in different ways than we do, to see what their needs are and how we could possibly meet them in the future. We typically work in co-creation processes, working together with our news outsiders. And one quite illustrative example of that is our News Changemaker program. This was a program we ran this winter where we hired 10 young adults from the outer city areas in Stockholm, areas where crime rates are high and socioeconomic status low, trust in all of society's institutions much lower than the national average, but specifically when it comes to the media, the numbers are really not looking good, and they're looking especially bad when it comes to young audiences. So we decided to work with one of those groups to see what futures we could come up with together. We hired them for a 10-week co-creation process where the goal was to identify current problems, jobs to be done, and then meet those problems with the help of emerging technological opportunities. I could spend all of my time talking about that program, and I would be happy to do so, but we have a limited slot available. But if I were to summarize what this why we needed these young change makers to come into our organization, I'll use a quote from one of the participants. As Zakaria, a 16-year-old from one of these areas, said, "Everybody here looks like their name is Karin or Peter. Everybody in our office looks the same, has the same name." And he wasn't wrong. My middle name is Karin, and we do have a lot of Peters in our organizations. We are someone talked about is we're in a crisis, the news industry is in a crisis, and it feels like we always are, but when it comes to our ability to look at issues in different ways, our representation crisis is definitely one that's limiting us. So we needed these young adults to come in to help us imagine possible futures. We've published all of their work on a website, so I won't talk about it in more detail now. You can go check that out, it's whatifthenews.com. But I want to share some of their ideas about what a technology-powered future for journalism could look like. First off, our young changemakers ideated a concept that they called the News Clinic. The News Clinic is a service that aims to cater to the problem of consumers feeling that the news has a negative impact on their mental health. Our young changemakers wanted an AI-driven news therapist to be available to coach you through news consumption at all times. This news therapist is there to help you deal with any feelings that news evokes in you and coach you to constructively work with them. It's an AI-powered avatar that you get to choose the tone, the voice, the look of. The avatar could be activated manually by you pushing an activation button, but it could also be automatically activated through you showing signs of physical distress. You might be holding your phone harder, your temperature is increasing. The idea here is that consumers need a coach, a therapist in consuming the news. A second concept from our young changemakers is called It's Time. It's Time is a recommendation service, basically, that takes as its core idea or core goal to push people out of news consumption. The changemakers' idea here is that we are optimizing journalism on the wrong metrics. Nobody should be optimizing for increasing time spent, but rather the only goal that we should have is to make sure that we, in as short amount of time as possible, give our consumers access to meaningful information that they can use in their everyday lives. The service is an AI-driven curation service that gives consumers a news budget. Every week, you're allowed to spend 7 hours on news consumption, maximum 1 hour per day, 30 minutes in one go. Once you've reached your limit, you've used up your budget, the service self-destructs, pushes you out of consumption. The final case that I'll share is, again, an AI-powered system where our young changemakers asks, what if the news was music? There's a lot of data showing that young consumers are not appreciating the current formats of news journalism, but they are very much appreciating music as a cultural phenomena, but also as one describing our contemporary world. So our changemakers said, why don't you tap into that potential and use generative AI to create music as a news format? And they have the science to back up this idea, because we know that pedagogically, music helps us understand. Many of us can still recite the songs that we heard as kids. The words stick in a different way. We actually built this concept out. We created a functioning news service using generative AI to create instrumental interpretations of news articles, but also pure music experiences where we generated raps of news articles. And these AI-generated songs were published on the biggest news destination in the Nordics, Aftonbladet, last week. We had thousands of young users explore this format, test this format, and the feedback was really unison. They loved it. And I'm pretty sure many of you in this room will hate it. And I think that says a lot about the challenge at hand. We have vast generational differences in how we want to consume the news, and I believe that AI can help us meet those differences. The overarching question of this program is really, what if the news were radically different, truly different? What if the formats of the past, text, video, image, what if that's not the only format that news should come in the future? And what was really clear to us was that even if we weren't asking our young adults to do so, AI was part of all of their ideated experiments, ideated solutions, because it's natural to them. They were born into a pure digital world, and to them, pure digital news experiences are natural, and news as AI-generated music is natural. My company, Schibsted, was founded in the early 1800s, and I think a question like this is especially important to companies like us, who have a long tradition, a successful tradition, of doing journalism the way that we've been doing for the past 200 years. It's especially important for us to consider what would happen if the formats were radically different. But I think it's an important question for anyone who wants to protect and safeguard independent journalism going forward, and make sure that that journalism reaches a broad society. I started my presentation with a number, so I will end with a cheesy quote. I think it's really, really critical that as we explore AI technologies, we do that by putting human needs, human desires front and center. I would urge you to co-create your future news experiences together with your future audiences. Our experience is that by bringing outsiders in, we land in very different places than we do when we ideate with the people who are already invested in the ways that we are doing things today. AI will operate in whatever boxes we put it in. Machine learning systems will do what we tell them to. So it's very much a human, empathic process of figuring out what the future boxes for journalism should be. Thanks so much.
You keep that one. Okay, that was truly inspiring. Thank you so much. And we've got like about 5 minutes, really, as you can tell, we're already running late, so we have time for some questions. If we've got some mics in the room, I might just start. Like in journalism, we're really dealing in sort of like the facts of now, and we have systems to deal with that. And you're talking about sort of, prototyping for, possible futures, and sort of really being open to the news being something that we don't even really recognise now. How does one do that in a newsroom? Like, what advice do you have for newsrooms to get started? Perhaps even just starting with the culture.
Charlie already said it, but I think the starting point is try to use the tools. There's no way of understanding the potential if you don't have your own experiences of actually using these tools. That also brings with it that you're going to experience all the ways that these tools are bad, that they don't work. So it's a fruitful way of setting your expectations right, I think. So start trying the tools.
Okay, we have one question here. Do we have mics? Okay. We'll take the question there and the question here. Tiona, so the question there, then the question here, and then we'll give it to Agnes to wrap up.
Hi, this is a little bit more sort of a reflection on what Charlie has been talking about, but also regarding Agnes's point. I understand and I share your sort of calm in terms of AI not immediately replacing human work, but human work transforming. What does replace human work is your shareholders and investors and sponsors who are very much driven, and we see this in the industry, by superstition and superficial understanding, and are more than happy to get rid of human labor we've seen this all along, especially well-protected human labor. So as this type of work or line of work transforms, the protections that had been earned or fought for previously also go away, and these are sort of transformations that also seem to be yet lacking those certain protections. Do you see a way to implement these tools already keeping this part in mind?
I think that's a very important comment, and I can't speak for Charlie being on a Google-funded project, but for me, not being on a Google-funded project, I think it's very important that we explore these solutions with an open source mindset. There's a big difference in proprietary models and open source models, both in terms of legal liabilities and accountability measures, but also given the topic that you raised now. So I would urge you to try these tools, but with a specific eye on open source tools. Hugging Face, Stable Diffusion, brilliant models to try. That also taps into your topic.
Hi, Julia Haas from the OSCE. Thanks, this was phenomenal. Just a quick question on a little bit, maybe you responded to it already with linking to open source, but how do you think can better use of these technologies, how can it be prevented to perpetuate biases that these technologies bring with them if new formats are being explored by them? Thanks.
Yeah, so this is a major issue. Machine learning systems learn from the past, and the past has faults, and our way of selecting representations of the past has definite faults. I would say two things. I would say on the one hand, audit the models and the data sets that you use. Try your very best to ensure diversity of representation in the data set that the models that you're using or buying or building are trained on. Secondly, audit your culture. At Schibsted, we have a risk assessment framework that we call FAST. It stands for Fairness, Accountability, Sustainability, and Transparency, 4 issues with critical risks to consider in the AI domain. There are questions related to culture, there are questions related to technology, organization, vast landscape, but the core point is that you have to keep interrogating both your systems, technology, data, and your organization. So have conversations, do risk assessment throughout using AI systems. The FAST framework is also published openly online, so if anybody is interested in that, I'll send you a link.
Okay, thank you very much, Agnes. So Agnes is around till lunchtime tomorrow, around the conference, or today at least. Today at least, if anyone wants to talk more, and I'm sure you will. It's been a great way to, I guess, to open up the conversation, but open up our minds as well to really sort of start to think that, you know, it's not just to improve journalism, but, you know, who knows where it's going to take us. And if we don't open up that space to explore the possibilities of AI in our newsroom, then I think we'll be missing out a lot. And you've given us a great way to start thinking about that. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.